When a family gets involved with the child welfare system, it raises a really tough question. Where exactly is the line between protecting a child and protecting a parent's rights? We're about to dive into a really complex and personal case that, in many ways, puts that entire system on trial.
This quote, it just cuts right to the chase, doesn't it? It's from the mother's formal complaint, and it really frames the whole conflict. This wasn't just about her child's safety in her eyes. It was about whether the system itself was being fair, or if it was acting on prejudice.
So what we're going to do here is unpack the official documents from this case. We're going to try to understand this one family's journey, look at the accusations, the laws behind them, and the evidence that was presented by everybody involved.
Okay, so to really get what's going on, we have to start with the specific claims that kicked off this whole legal fight. We'll begin with the mother's side of the story, as she laid it out in her official complaint. And this really is the million-dollar question hanging over every single detail of this case. The mother's argument is that the agency blew right past a critical line, turning what should have been concern into what she felt was straight-up discrimination. Let's look at the specifics.
Her case really boils down to a few major points. First off, she claims her mental health diagnosis was unfairly used against her, which she says is a violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. She also points to a court that found her incompetent, even though she says her own mental health evaluations said the opposite. And this is a big one. She argues that these safety agreements and a ban on seeing her child were basically used to end her parental rights without ever giving her a real day in court.
So this idea of disability discrimination, that's the real core of her argument. And to really grasp what she's saying, we need to take a quick look at the federal laws that are supposed to prevent exactly this kind of thing from happening.
And that brings us to the actual laws at the heart of her complaint. You see, laws like the Americans with Disabilities Act or the ADA, they aren't just suggestions. They have very specific rules for any government agency that gets federal money, and that absolutely includes child welfare services.
The ADA is a huge civil rights law. Now, for a case like this, Title II is what really matters. It says that state and local governments, and yep, that means county social services, cannot discriminate against someone because of a disability. The mother's complaint argues that this is exactly what happened to her.
And you know, federal guidance gets even more specific. It basically says, look, you can't make life-altering decisions based on stereotypes or assumptions about someone's disability. Decisions have to be based on facts, on objective evidence, on what an individual can actually do, not on bias. And this is the standard the mother claims the system totally failed to meet.
Okay, so with that legal stuff in mind, let's zoom in on the specific things the court and the agency actually did that became the flashpoints in this case.
Now, this is one of the biggest bombshells in her complaint. It has to do with something called a temporary parental safety agreement. She argues these were used to take her child away from her before a judge ever saw the case. From where she stood, it felt like a way to get around the legal system, pushing her into voluntarily giving up her child without any of the protections you're supposed to get in a courtroom.
And then there was this blanket gag order, and this became a huge sticking point. The court basically banned her from talking about the case on social media. She argued this was a flat-out violation of her freedom of speech, and that it was a way to completely silence her side of the story.
But of course, there's another side to this. The court had its reasons, and they laid them out pretty clearly in the documents. The whole point, they said, was to protect the child's privacy — juvenile records are confidential after all — and to protect everyone involved from the kind of online harassment that can just poison a case like this.
All right, this is where things get really complicated, because how the system documented the actions of each parent, well, it's like night and day. While the mother was claiming she was treated unfairly, the court record was telling a very different story based on what they observed.
When you look at the court's analysis, the contrast they paint is just stark. On one hand, they note the mother posted pictures of the child online with nasty comments about the caregivers. They saw a pattern of her only kinda sorta engaging with the services offered, and she apparently wouldn't sign releases to let them get information. On the other hand, the record shows the father complying with everything the agency asked, and it notes the child said she felt safe with him and that their bond was growing.
And then you have a voice that is so important in all of this: the child's. According to the court records, the child told her official representative, the person whose only job is to look out for her best interests, that she wanted to stay with her father. She reportedly said she was done with her mom, and that her mom used her like a therapist.
You know, it's easy to look at this as just one family's tragic story, but it's really not. It plugs right into a much bigger, ongoing conversation about the child welfare system and the incredible pressures it's under all across the state.
So, just to give you some perspective on the scale we're talking about here, as of early 2025, there were almost 11,000 kids in North Carolina's foster care system alone. It's a massive system, and it's facing some pretty immense challenges.
And believe me, that system is feeling the pressure. You talk to lawmakers, to advocates, and they'll point to some huge issues. Not enough state oversight, a critical shortage of foster homes, and even a culture where foster parents sometimes feel like they'll face retaliation if they speak up too loudly for a child. These are the systemic problems that are the backdrop for every individual case.
And that's what brings this whole thing full circle. The mother's complaint, it isn't just about her and her child. It ends with this big call for sweeping, systemic changes. It's demanding that the entire system be held to a higher standard when it comes to complying with the ADA and truly acting in the best interest of every child.
So in the end, where does that leave us? You have a mother who feels completely discriminated against, a court that sees a clear pattern of noncompliance, and a child who has your own stated wishes. When everyone has a different story and the laws are this complicated, it really makes you wonder, how can any system ever be sure it's finding what's truly in the best interest of the child?